So my story kind of starts in New York City. As Wei just said, I was working as an AmeriCorps Vista, working with the homeless, and that's a national service program. It's like the Peace Corps for those who aren't familiar with it. And I did that for a year, and then came out of it and started working in architecture practice. But my background was my undergraduate degree was in English, so it's a longer story. But while I was in New York, I would go to the Strand, the bookstore, all the time, and I found Rem Koolhaas's book, Delirious New York, and just became completely fascinated by it and very inspired. So I decided, architecture is the path I really want to dive more deeply into. And he was teaching here at the GSD, as he still does. So I applied and then, wound up in the MArch program here. This is one I pulled a couple things out of the archive here. Do they still teach descriptive geometry? Here, is that a core piece of the program? So this is one of my original descriptive geometry drawings, and this was done by hand. I don't know if anybody does anything by hand anymore, but Scott Cohen was teaching that course, and he was my advisor. So I was this is to say, I was like very deeply into the idea of architecture as cultural production, as formal production, and so these were some of my projects. Like this was MArch 1, Core, and Option Studio projects that I did. I was in the design track. And while I was here, there was a kind of call from the Department of Planning. They were looking for somebody who would be able to do editing and research for Professor Rick Peiser's real estate book. And I had this background in English, so I wound up working for him doing that and got increasingly interested in. To me, the question was, what comes before architecture? Like, what you pick up the pen or the mouse and you start doing architecture, but what are the forces that are informing that in advance, that are in a way setting the program for what the building is going to be? And this started becoming more evident to me as I was working as a researcher on that book. I asked Professor Peiser, how can I get more deeply into this? He suggested, well, why don't you take some courses? And one of the great advantages of the GSD is that you have the ability to do these cross registrations. So for those of you who, I think we have some folks from MIT in this course, I believe. I see some head nodding. Smart. It's good. This cross-pollination is very, very good. How many people are cross-registering into other courses? I see 2, 3, 4, couple. How do you like that? That's good. All right. So I did that. I took real property asset management at the business school. I took corporate finance at the Kennedy School, and I took REIT finance at MIT. And I was pretty outgunned in the math department on that one, but I survived. So, and in a way, these 3 segments set up some of the issues that I'll talk about, which is there's the finance and there's the business of real estate. The Kennedy School is so valuable and critical to the practice of real estate. There is always a policy issue involved for people who are interested in the policy of city making. And then there's always a technology component to it too. So I'll get into that a little bit in the part 2 of the talk. But this kind of sets a baseline for that. So I continued with my work in core and got close to graduating. And at the end of that experience, in May, we started talking with some folks at a publication called 306090, which was a journal that was being produced out of Princeton Architectural Press. And I co-edited this journal 306090 called Autonomous Urbanism with a fellow GSD classmate, a brilliant thinker who was in the planning program and now happens to be my wife, Kirsty Munson. I have to put that plug in there. And so you can see the red arrow is pointing to an article wherein we interviewed John Portman, because I was very interested in this kind of trajectory of what is the relationship to real estate and architecture. Okay, we graduated and we did a competition for a planning project in Shanghai. This was in 2003, the summer of 2003, and it was led by one of our classmates, a person named Wenwei Shan, and it won. And she eventually invited us to come to China and kind of work for her for several years. And so we did that, and it was a booming time, very, very exciting, and we got more involved. Kind of back to Portman. Portman is distinguished. How many people here know who John Portman is, in fact? Okay, a pretty good number. For those who don't, John Portman started as an architect in the 50s, 60s, and he really is the first architect as developer. In fact, he wrote a book called The Architect as Developer, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it. And I think that book was published in the 70s or 80s. He's arguably the most successful architect who became a developer and combined those two practices and sustained them. So there at Portman, there is an architecture firm, John Portman and Associates, and a development business called Portman Holdings, and then there's a family office called Portman Financial. And as when Weijia mentioned, I worked in all three of those areas during my time at Portman. So these are some projects examples, Portman projects. On the left, you have Hilton San Diego, which was a $350 million hotel development near the convention center. It's designed and developed by Portman. Songdo Landmark City in the central image is a 1,500-acre master development in Incheon, Korea. I was the project manager of that on the planning side. And again, Portman did the design and the planning and the development in a joint venture with Samsung and Hyundai. And then on the right is a project called Jinhongqiao Tower, also in Shanghai. So part two of Portman, he had done the architect as developer model, but he was also the first architect and developer to do a modern real estate development project in China. So that happened in the 80s. So there was a lot of interesting dynamics with regard to how to work in a kind of international context. And so that was another one of the things that led me to be interested in practicing with him. So these are some other images from time at Portman. In addition to what I would just call straight real estate and design work, there were some interesting things. We were participants in the Venice Biennale of Architecture. There was a film made about him that I was involved in supporting the creation of this film. And then on the development side, we were looking at new models. This was around 2013, 2014, of collaborating with other designers. So the project on the right is one that we did, wherein Portman was the developer and part of the design team, and Bjarke Ingels Group was the design firm that we engaged as architect. So it was a great time to work with Portman. I'm very grateful for that time. And maybe one idea here for people who are considering getting involved in these modes of practice is to really think about who is out there doing the kind of thing that interests you most, because it's very idiosyncratic, right? Like you have to kind of identify what you care about most and then look to see, who's doing that kind of thing. And for me, the answer was John Portman. So then fast forward to my own practice. Again, my wife was from Minnesota, and we had some small children and decided to get closer to her family. So people said always, "Oh, why did you decide to open your practice in Minnesota?" And my answer to that is, in order to remain married, which was a wise choice. So I kind of came out of the chute. We had a good run with Portman and had the capacity to start up. And I started, the image on the left was a response to a city RFP for a new mixed-use project. Also, I should mention that Kirsty Munson, my wife, was the then newly appointed director of city planning at the city of Minneapolis, which created what we like to call our own public-private partnership. However, that project was not selected, but we went on to do numerous other things, always kind of trying to live in both of these worlds. Like, how do you do design work and development work at the same time was the way that Portman had kind of structured it. So I was doing the mini version and have been now for 7 years. We designed the NBC's television studio in Minnesota. We did what we're showing here is some exhibition design for the state of Minnesota that we did in France. So it's very project specific. And one of the things when we were kind of starting up was thinking, how do you really get exposure? Like, how do you get your name out there? How do you put what you do in front of the world? For us, the answer was be on TV every night to an audience of hundreds of thousands of people and go to other countries. And that exhibit on the right had 75,000 people visit it in 10 days. So this was kind of a lesson learned from Portman's family office time, which had a lot to do with being interested in brand management and identity and how you kind of position who you are and what you do to the world. So the final two things I'll kind of show with regard to my work is a project on the left. What you're looking at is a image of the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis. We were engaged by them to do their urban strategy, which they were very interested in how they could kind of knit the urban area around their basilica back together and repair some kind of historical damages that had been done in terms of the urban fabric itself and the social fabric. And so that's the kind of project that we're interested in. And on the right, in the same kind of category, what you're looking at is a plan view of the central riverfront of Minneapolis. This is where it says upper lock. That's a lock where ships, go up and down to make changes in the water level to be able to navigate up the river. It was constructed and owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and then they several years ago decided to stop using it. So a kind of more federal level action made this area available. So we have been working with a not-for-profit group and a coalition of Native American Indian tribes to reclaim this site, which kind of got turned into an industrial site, into a cultural site. And again, to look into these issues of how do you address and reconcile with some histories which are very, very complex. So we don't probably have the time to get into all that. Be happy to talk about it more, and I'm sure my wife would be thrilled to talk about the work that she's doing, and she's really leading the initiative on this lock project, which has been going on for about 3 years now. So that's kind of the overview. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time here, 15 minutes of my background. I don't know, I'm very, very eager to share the history and the tokenization piece, but I also don't want to just get up here and monologue endlessly, and I need to breathe. So does anybody have any quick questions regarding some of those things that I just presented? Maybe we could take a couple of minutes to just chat about it. Yes?
What kind of the incentive do you operate between development and design? Is it more of the economic aspect? Is it something else? Like, what's been the impetus to combine the two?
The impetus to combine the two? Originally, the impetus to combine the two was the idea that controlling the development of the program of the building would give you greater authorship of the building itself. So I would say that's a primary one. And I'll give credit to Terrence Riley. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? He was the chief curator of architecture and design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And I actually took his course. He taught an option studio here when I was a student. And he said in that course, whoever writes the program designs the building. And that always stuck with me. You know, it's arguable. Now, this is something that people can, it'd be a great kind of post-class debate to have in the Chow House. But I was kind of convinced that there's some truth to that.